All right, hello, History 362. So finally, at long last, let's actually talk about the campaigns of Alexander the Great, a whirlwind of violence that radically reorders the geopolitics, not just of the Mediterranean, but of the entire Iranian plateau. So in 334, Alexander finally crosses over into Asia with his army. It's quite a large army, roughly 40,000 men, although the core, the Macedonian core, is much smaller. He only has about 12,000 Macedonian infantry and a little less than 2,000 Macedonian cavalry, where all the rest are Greeks, levies from regions around Macedonia, mercenaries. And, of course, this army will get smaller as casualties, wastage, detachment to garrisons takes its toll. Now, the first Persian force that Alexander and his army confronts is a satrapal army at the river Granicus. So this is the first major battle. The satrapal army is actually is smaller. Again, remember the Persian kind of grand strategy involves having relatively modest satrapal armies as a kind of perimeter defense, and then if those can't hold off an invading force, then the great king levies his army. So Alexander actually has a numerical advantage when he confronts the Persians at the river Granicus. And the Persians basically acknowledge that. They set up a line of defense along the riverbank, on the far side of the riverbank, so that if Alexander is attacking, he's going to have to march his men through the river, and that's a significant barrier before they actually hit the Persian forces. Now, in the version of the battle that Arrian provides for us, Alexander is advised, hey, wait, let's go. We'll find another crossing, and we'll see if we can move and outflank them. And Alexander says, no, I'm attacking. And so he attacks by charging across the river with his companion cavalry, with his hetairoi, and slamming into the Persian cavalry, while his infantry also follows up by fighting across the river to confront the Persian infantry, many of whom are Greek mercenaries. In the cavalry fight, again, Alexander is at the forefront of this fight. This is a heroic model of leadership where Alexander tries to outfight his aristocratic companions. But in this cavalry fight, Alexander is almost killed. A Persian aristocrat knocks him down and is actually hits his helmet with an axe and is coming to deliver the killing blow when one of Alexander's bodyguard, named Cleitus the Black, intervenes and kills the Persian, thus saving Alexander's life. And here we can, I think, play a kind of counterfactual thought game of, well, what just happens if, before Cleitus the Black can come to the rescue, if Alexander is slain in the first major battle? And in fact, it is surprising that Alexander isn't killed on these campaigns. He risks his life in countless moments like this. But what happens if Alexander is just killed in 334? And of course, you might say, well, probably the 3rd century would have looked a lot like the 4th century. Macedonia may or may not have remained a power. One thing that Alexander has failed to do so far, and this will be important as we look forward to coming weeks, he has not had a kid. So if Alexander goes, there is no necessary immediate future to the dynasty. And so this would create a political crisis in Macedonia. So if Alexander had been killed, we could kind of imagine 4th century Greece carrying on with say, Sparta and Athens being the dominant powers, with a still quite powerful and cogent Persia, and then of course eventually that's the world that Rome would have entered into. Suffice it to say, you can counterfactual things all the way up to the present day. But Alexander doesn't die. He's saved by his bodyguard, and his well-timed, well-placed cavalry charge combined with his main phalanx getting across the river is enough to defeat this again relatively small satrapal army. So now Alexander is able to move with relative impunity through Asia Minor. Now there are still sort of fights because there's Persian garrisons throughout Asia, Asia Minor. The probably biggest siege is going to be at Halicarnassus, where Alexander engages in a protracted and difficult siege of the city. Nonetheless, Alexander really is quite successful because he's defeated the satrapal army. He's got his large and efficient army moving through Anatolia. He really has finally driven the Persians away from, out of Asia Minor, and has achieved what has been this long-standing goal of liberating the Greek cities from Asia Minor. This is what the Athenians had tried to do. The Spartans had tried to do this in the 390s. This is what sort of pro-Macedonian Greek intellectuals had called on Philip II to do. Say, hey, why are we Greeks fighting one another? Let's go free the Greek cities in Asia Minor from Persian control. And now Alexander's done it, and it's clear that he's now going to move the goalposts for what his campaign is about. And indeed, one maybe important ritual moment for doing this is he goes and visits Gordion. Gordion is in Phrygia, and it is the capital of a now defunct Phrygian Empire, the Phrygian kingdom of King Midas. But still a kind of important ritual site that provides a kind of memory of a bygone pre-Achaemenid past. And in Gordion, there is probably actually parked in a temple, a wagon that has an elaborate knot on the kind of tongue that would eventually help connect to where the horses would be harnessed. So there's a knot on the wagon. And it seems that over time there's a kind of folklore that whoever unties this knot will become Lord of Asia. And again, this may sound, is this whole thing folklore? Well, it actually may be Alexander has heard this folklore, because he definitely goes to Gordion. He's heard the story, and now he intends to go to fulfill it as a way of saying, hey, we're not just going to campaign in Asia Minor, the original goal when this army is raised by Philip II. We're going for something else. And so Alexander goes to the wagon, supposedly sort of tries to untie the knot. It's a really complex knot, and then draws his sword and cuts it. And in this kind of, again, probably staged, almost kind of theatrical event, claims that he has bigger ambitions. And so Alexander now, for a while, he has an illness and this delays him a bit, but finally he starts moving through the Cilician gates and down into what's now Syria. And finally, Darius, the Achaemenid king, has raised his, again, it's a ponderous, slow mobilization, but has raised a large army and moves to intercept him, and actually successfully intercepts him. Alexander's moving south, Darius moves and cuts him off from his sources of supply. So Alexander turns and goes north and confronts Darius near Issus. Issus, the Battle of Issus. And again, Darius arrays his much, much larger royal army. And here is just a quirk of Greek historiography, that it was acceptable to the Greeks to grossly exaggerate the number of Persians. But probably this is an army that is larger than Alexander's army, probably 40,000, 50,000 troops drawn from across the Persian Empire. Alexander, seeing this defensive line, in some ways pulls a very similar maneuver in that he is going to charge across the river with his companion cavalry, personally leading them. And here, again, the personal leadership might fail, but Alexander does seem to have an uncanny eye towards the right place and right moment to strike with his heavy cavalry, riding right in with everyone following in a way that maximally disrupts the line. I mean, it's again, it may not even be conscious, but this is why Alexander's battle plans, that otherwise, probably shouldn't work, seem to work quite well. And this takes place again as the rest of his army is moving across the river, and so Alexander's cavalry charge goes to the river, strikes a vulnerable point in the Persian line. It may not even be that, and it seems that Alexander is actually trying to confront and engage Darius personally. He's looking for where the king is, but then subsequently Alexander is smart enough to turn his cavalry and roll up the Persian line, and it is a brief but disastrous battle in which the Persian army quite quickly collapses. Darius himself is forced to flee, a grave humiliation for a Persian king. Alexander not only captures some of his baggage, but also captures some of his family, since Darius has brought some members of his family with him, including a daughter. And Alexander here famously treats them with studied courtesy, in part not just because Alexander is a nice person, but it seems he's sort of treating them as his family now, as he may already be kind of mentally migrating from being the Macedonian king to the next king of the Persian Empire. Nonetheless, this is a disastrous defeat from Darius. Supposedly Darius writes a letter offering Alexander the empire he's already captured, offering him to marry the daughter that he's captured, and Alexander refuses it, saying, I already have these things already. I don't need them to be offered by you. And so again, Alexander seems to be moving the goalposts now towards conquering the entirety of the Achaemenid Empire. Now, Alexander does have a bit of a problem, even though he has been enriched so far with the loot that he's captured, and the capture of Sardis, the major royal treasury, has really alleviated a lot of immediate money problems. But he still has this big, expensive Athenian fleet that is protecting his sort of seaborne supply lines from the Persian navy, which is largely based along the Phoenician coast. And money may not be the only reason why he's not really happy with the big Athenian navy, because the Athenians he's a little suspicious of the Athenians and may not necessarily want to allow them to maintain this military arm that is their traditional strength. And so Alexander disbands his, again, mostly Athenian fleet, but, he's got to do something about the Persian fleet now. And so in order to achieve continued naval superiority in the Aegean, Alexander now proceeds to move down the Phoenician coast, capturing every Persian naval base along the way. One of the key ones is Tyre. Tyre is a Phoenician city-state located on an island offshore. Tyre is the mother city of Carthage. And Alexander, in order to capture it, launches one of the sort of most ambitious sieges in antiquity, where he literally builds a causeway out to the island so that he can move his siege equipment, subsequently captures it by siege, storming the walls, breaching the walls, and subsequently executes a significant number, several thousand, of the male population. Tyre is to this day still a peninsula. It's no longer an island. I mean, Alexander the Great has literally changed the topography of that coastline. He subsequently moves south, another difficult but successful siege at Gaza, which is also sacked with substantial exemplary violence. This capture also, again, captures two key sort of Persian naval bases. Now, Alexander then crosses over into Egypt. And Egypt is friendly territory. The Egyptians have really never liked being part of the Achaemenid Empire. They have their own memory of pharaonic rule. And as such, they welcome Alexander and his army as liberators. And of course, it doesn't help that Egypt has, within recent memory, within living memory, been recaptured by Artaxerxes III. And during this recapture, even though the Persians are usually they're pretty good with respecting local cults. I mean, they're a big multicultural empire, and they kind of realize, hey, it's easier to rule a big multicultural empire if you largely are tolerant of people's various religions. But in recapturing Egypt, Artaxerxes has really angered at least the Egyptian priestly class by, there is a sacred bull in Egypt, the Apis bull. And the Apis bull sort of is a key figure in kind of the broader Egyptian cosmology of life and death and rebirth. And so this is a bull that's revered while it's alive, and then it's mummified after it's dead, and a new one is, they go out and actually identify the Apis bull. But Artaxerxes has killed, when he's retaken Egypt, has killed it and eaten it, had a big barbecue as a way of showing that he is indeed in charge again. So when Alexander comes over and safeguards Egyptian temples, sacrifices to the Apis bull and respects it, this is what the Egyptian priestly class wants to hear. And so in Egypt, he's really welcomed. It's in Egypt he plans a new city, Alexandria, to be named after himself. And he also makes a very unusual pilgrimage to an oracle, the oracle of Zeus Ammon in Siwa. So it's an oracle in a oasis out in the desert. Supposedly he does this trip on a lark, and he and his followers don't really bring enough provisions, and they're actually kind of arriving hungry and thirsty and short of water. This is an oracle that is run by Egyptians, but has sort of a lot of their customers are Greeks. That's why we actually have the syncretism of Zeus and the Egyptian god Amun-Ra. Whatever happens at this oracle, it seems that the priests tell Alexander what he wants to hear, and he seems to come away thinking that his father is not Philip II, but rather Zeus himself. And so, again, this story, again, it's in reconstructing Alexander's psychology is difficult, given that all of our sources are Roman. All of them are written 400 or more years after the fact. But this may be one that this event only increases Alexander's kind of megalomania, in that he's increasingly sees himself as a very, very special person, and comes away ready to resume his war with Darius. And so Alexander, now leaving Egypt, takes his army and enters, plots a campaign that will go into the heartland of the Achaemenid Empire. Now, Darius, of course, has not been idle. He's been raising yet another large army, and this army confronts Alexander and his army at the Battle of Gaugamela in what's now modern-day Iraq. Now, sometimes we hear this also referred to as the Battle of Arbela, but Gaugamela is the usual term. This is the most difficult battle because Alexander is again badly outnumbered. Darius has, whatever he brought to the Battle of Issus, he's bringing everything he's got. He knows this is his last chance. And Alexander's plan is basically for his phalanx to hold the line against the crush of Darius's attack, while Alexander can again maneuver with his cavalry, find the weak point in Darius's army. Again, also Alexander may just be looking to see, can he find Darius and personally try to engage and kill him. There's a kind of Homeric desire for monomachy, and hope that cavalry can then eventually roll up the Persian line. And this battle plan works. And Alexander, here where Arrian presents him as again a more cautious and careful tactician, in the sense that he's made a provision for being outflanked and even enveloped by the Persians by setting up a second line of not Macedonians, but sort of his lesser infantry to guard his rear. And so basically trying to buy himself as much time. The story, there is a story that is told after the battle that the commander of the phalanx, Parmenion, who was one of Philip's generals that Alexander has kind of inherited, keeps sending sort of scared, panicky messages to Alexander, saying, where are you? Where's the cavalry? When are you going to roll up the Persians? We're really hard pressed here. Now, Parmenion is subsequently to be liquidated by Alexander. So it's possible the story of the kind of panicky, flighty Parmenion is a story that's invented after this sort of purge takes place. And of course, it's kind of difficult to see how those messages could have necessarily gone back and forth while Alexander is literally charging into the heart of the Persian army. That would be quite a hell of a messenger if that did indeed happen. Nonetheless, at the battle, while the phalanx is hard pressed, while the Persians do break through and capture some of the Macedonian baggage, Alexander's basic battle plan of hold the line with your infantry and then punch as hard and fast with your cavalry works. And of course, it works in part because Alexander does keep his eye on the prize. Once he's managed to penetrate into the Persian line, he uses his cavalry and swings and rolls it up, again trapping large portions of the Persian army between his enveloping cavalry and the Macedonian phalanx. That seems to be what the Alexander mosaic represents. It's debated whether that should represent Isis or Gaugamela, or maybe just sort of both, but you actually see Darius and the fleeing Persians trapped between the sudden arrival of Alexander's cavalry and the bristle of the infantry's sarissai sort of looming over in the background. Darius again flees. There seems to be a substantial casualties amongst the Persians, and this is really the last big royal army that Darius is going to be able to muster. After this, he is in full retreat as Alexander subsequently begins sort of moving and mopping up parts of the Persian Empire, capturing Babylon and then moving towards Persia itself. So I think what we're going to do is I'm going to stop right here. I will drop another video this weekend on the other half of Alexander's campaigns. Next time I teach this course, we may do multiple weeks on Alexander. I think I may not have been very generous on how much time I gave Alexander this time, but we'll talk the second part of Alexander's campaigns this weekend, and then we will next week be able to embark on the post-Alexander world. So stand by for more Alexander coming soon.